I used to introduce myself by my job. It was the first thing out of my mouth at parties, at barbecues, even at my own family holidays. It wasn't arrogance, it was pride. I'd worked my way into a career that made me feel solid in the world, like no matter what else went wrong, I could stand on my own 2 feet. Then I met Evan, and slowly, quietly, I stopped saying my job out loud. And eventually, I stopped having it at all. We met in Chicago in our late 20s, both pretending we weren't looking for anything serious. He was funny in that effortless way that makes you feel like you're the only person in the room getting the joke. He worked in finance, long hours, nice suits, always smelled like clean laundry and expensive coffee. I was in marketing, the kind of role that demanded late nights and constant proving. We bonded over stress and sarcasm. It felt equal, balanced, safe. When we moved in together, nothing about me felt smaller yet. We split rent, we argued over furniture like two adults with opinions. When he proposed 2 years later, I cried in the restaurant bathroom, not because it was some perfect rom-com moment, but because it felt like choosing a life that still had room for me inside it. The first crack showed up disguised as practicality. His firm offered him a promotion in Seattle, a big one, the kind that comes with a title people recognize and a salary you don't say out loud because it feels rude. I remember sitting on the edge of our couch while he paced, explaining numbers and growth and opportunity. He was glowing. I was nodding. My company didn't have an office there. "It's not forever," he said. "You can find something else. You're talented. And honestly, with what I'll be making, we won't be stressed anymore." We weren't stressed then. Not really. But I agreed. That's the part that still stings. I agreed quickly because I loved him and because I believed the story we'd always told each other, that we were a team and teams make sacrifices. Seattle was gray and unfamiliar. His job swallowed him whole almost immediately. I spent weeks sending resumes, drinking coffee alone, watching rain slide down the windows of an apartment that didn't feel like mine yet. Eventually, a recruiter suggested something temporary: consulting, contract work, flexible hours. Evan loved that word, flexible. "Maybe this is a sign," he said one night while loosening his tie. "You've been burned out for years. Why not take a breather? Focus on us, on the house, on whatever you want." Whatever you want sounded generous. It also sounded like nothing concrete at all. I told myself it was temporary. I told my parents the same thing. I told myself I was lucky to have a husband who could carry us financially. When we got married that fall, I didn't think of it as giving anything up. I thought of it as pressing pause. Pause stretched. The consulting gigs dried up faster than I expected. The market shifted. Recruiters stopped calling. Evan's job expanded, and with it, his expectations. He didn't say them outright at first. They just settled into the space between us. He'd comment on dinner if it was late, on laundry if it piled up, on the way the house looked when his colleagues came over. Little things, reasonable things, things that made sense if you squinted at them the right way. "You're home more than I am," he'd say, casual, not unkind. "It just makes sense." I started organizing my days around his schedule. Grocery shopping mid-morning, gym during lunch, dinner timed when his car pulled into the driveway. I stopped wearing real clothes during the day, stopped checking my work email. When people asked what I did, I hesitated just long enough to feel embarrassed. I didn't notice how quiet my phone had become until one afternoon when I realized no one outside my family had texted me in 3 days. Evan, meanwhile, was thriving. New suits, new confidence, new friends I barely knew. He talked about work constantly, in acronyms and names I couldn't keep straight. When I tried to contribute, he'd nod politely, like I was a kid repeating something I'd overheard. Sometimes late at night, I'd open my laptop and scroll job listings. My chest would tighten reading descriptions that used to feel written for me. I'd close the computer and tell myself, tomorrow. The first real fight we had in Seattle was about money, which sounds ironic given how much he made. I wanted to book a weekend trip back to Chicago for a friend's birthday. Plane tickets weren't cheap. "Do you really need to go?" he asked, eyes still on his phone. "I haven't seen her in over a year." He sighed like I was asking for something unreasonable. "I just think we should be smart. I'm the only one bringing income in right now." I remember the way the words landed. Not loud, not angry, just heavy. I went anyway. I put it on my credit card. I didn't tell him until after. That night, lying in my old friend's guest room, surrounded by laughter and familiar chaos, I felt something close to grief. Everyone else's lives had moved forward in ways I could see. Promotions, breakups, babies. Mine felt like it had narrowed down to one person and one house, and a life that existed mostly when Evan was home to witness it. When I got back, he was cold for days. Not openly mad, worse, distant, efficient, like a boss disappointed in an employee.
I apologized first. That still makes my stomach turn. After that, I tried harder. I convinced myself this was marriage, that this was what partnership looked like when one person's career surged ahead of the others. I cooked more, I listened better, I asked fewer questions. That's probably why I missed the signs when they started. Or maybe I saw them and didn't want to know what they meant. The late nights got later, the texts he wouldn't answer when I walked into the room, the way he angled his phone away from me on the couch. He started going to team dinners that somehow never included spouses. When I joked about being a corporate widow, he didn't laugh. One night while loading the dishwasher, I asked him if everything was okay between us. He looked surprised, almost offended. Of course it is. Why would you ask that? I didn't have a clean answer, just a feeling I couldn't articulate without sounding insecure, ungrateful, dependent, all the things I was terrified of becoming. So I swallowed it, again. I told myself not to be that woman, the one who clings because she's scared, the one who built her whole life around her husband and then panics when he starts orbiting somewhere else. I didn't realize I already was her. The moment everything shifted wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no discovery. Just a conversation on an ordinary Tuesday night that left me sitting at our kitchen table long after Evan had gone to bed, staring at my own reflection in the dark window, wondering how I'd let my entire sense of security slip so quietly out of my hands. After that night, I started noticing patterns I had ignored before, tiny things that suddenly felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to finish. He started texting less openly, always leaving his phone face down. He left the office later and later, claiming new responsibilities, but sometimes his car wasn't in the driveway until well after midnight. I tried to convince myself it was just work. I kept telling myself he was ambitious, he was driven, he was the man I married, but the tight knot in my stomach refused to dissolve.
I remember the first real pang of panic hitting me one Friday evening. I was on the couch, binge-watching some throwaway series to distract myself, when I saw a name pop up in his messages. Sophie. It wasn't alarming on its own. He had female colleagues, friends from school, family, but the way the notification appeared, the brief glimpse of words scrolling by, the casual tone of their banter, it made something inside me freeze. There was a warmth in the words, a familiarity, a teasing rhythm that I didn't recognize in our own interactions anymore. I pretended not to notice. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that the late nights, the secrecy, the little smiles at his phone, it was just work stress, just friendship, just a harmless text. But the more I tried to push it aside, the more I noticed. The random weekend trips he would take for work, claiming client dinners that always conveniently started after dark. The subtle scent on his shirt sometimes, perfume or lotion that wasn't mine. I should have stopped ignoring it. But part of me didn't want to see it. I wanted my life to make sense. I wanted to believe that the man I loved, the one I had trusted with everything, was still him. One night, around 2 a.m, I woke up to a vibration from his side of the bed. I reached for my phone, heart hammering in my chest. The screen lit up with a text preview I couldn't unread. The words weren't explicit, not yet, but they carried a closeness I had never shared with him. My pulse went wild. My fingers shook as I swiped to unlock the phone, and there it was, a string of messages between Evan and Sophie that made it impossible to pretend anymore. There were inside jokes, flirty comments, little things that no work friend would say. And then came the photos. He'd sent her pictures of himself, at home, in bed, in moments that were supposed to be private between us. I couldn't breathe. I felt my hands go cold. I wanted to scream, to break something, to shake him awake and demand answers. But he was asleep, oblivious, probably dreaming of spreadsheets or meetings, while I sat there staring at the undeniable truth on his phone. I closed it slowly, carefully, as if sealing away a bomb. I wanted to wake him, to confront him, but I couldn't. My voice would have been shaking too much. My rage and my hurt were tangled up with guilt for letting myself become this invisible version of me, guilt for trusting too much, for loving too much. The next day, I didn't speak. I watched him move around the apartment, made breakfast, poured coffee, laughed casually at something on TV as if nothing had changed. And nothing had changed for him. For me, everything had shattered. I kept my hands busy with laundry, dishes, anything to stop my mind from replaying the texts, the photos, the laughter I imagined he shared with her. It was torture sitting in the same room with him, knowing exactly what he'd done without letting him see that I knew. For a week, I watched him like a detective without evidence, noticing every glance at his phone, every excuse for being out late. I checked the bank statements, the credit card records, nothing concrete, just a trail of inconsistencies that fueled my paranoia. I started thinking about all the times I had ignored little red flags, telling myself I was just tired, that marriage wasn't a soap opera, that I loved him, and that had to be enough. But love wasn't enough.
It couldn't be, and I didn't know if it ever had been. I started retreating. I stopped cooking the meals I knew he liked, stopped asking about his day, stopped laughing at his jokes. He noticed. I could see it in the way he glanced at me over his morning coffee, confused, trying to reach across a widening chasm I hadn't yet named. I wanted to tell him I knew, to force him to confess, to make him feel the weight of his betrayal. But I was scared. Scared of the confrontation, scared of the truth, scared of the life that would follow if I finally acknowledged the full scope of what he had done. Then came the night I almost confronted him. We were at home, quiet except for the hum of the fridge, both pretending that the air wasn't heavy with tension. I saw his phone buzz on the counter. My chest seized. He leaned over it casually, typing a reply, laughing softly to himself. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the phone, trembling. "Who's Sophie?" I asked, voice sharper than I intended. He froze, mid-typing, and for a second, I thought he would deny it. I thought maybe he'd convince me I was overreacting. But he didn't. He didn't even flinch. He just looked at me, tired, annoyed almost, like I had interrupted a routine he didn't consider a crime. "She's just someone from work," he said, voice calm. Too calm. "Nothing?" I repeated, the words slicing through the quiet apartment like glass. "You're sending her photos of yourself in our bed. You're hiding conversations. This is nothing?" He shrugged. "It's complicated. You're overthinking." That was it. That was his explanation. Complicated. Overthinking. And the casualness of it made my blood run cold. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. I wanted to rip his clothes off him and look for proof of another life I didn't know existed. But mostly, I wanted to disappear. I wanted to melt into the couch cushions and erase the last 5 years of my life. I spent the next days in a fog. I went through the motions, groceries, bills, the gym, the mail. Evan moved around me like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep well. Every text tone made me jump. Every message from a friend felt like a lifeline. I started replaying the past months in my head. All the little moments I had written off. All the times I had felt dismissed, overlooked, but told myself I was imagining it. All the late nights at team dinners. All the weekend trips for work. All the flirty laughter I had brushed off as harmless charm. The breaking point came when I followed him one Saturday. I told myself it was to get closure, to see if I was being paranoid. But it was worse. He drove to a coffee shop 20 minutes away, somewhere I had never heard him mention before. I parked 2 blocks away, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles were white. I watched him go inside. 5 minutes later, a woman walked out to meet him. Not just any woman. She was beautiful, effortlessly so, laughing at something he whispered, leaning into him like he had been the only person in the world for the past hour. And just like that, the life I thought we shared, the house, the apartment, the years of planning and promises, felt like a lie. I drove home in silence. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing I had seen. But when I got home, he was sitting on the couch like nothing had happened, scrolling his phone, sipping a beer. I stared at him, hatred and despair twisting together in a bitter knot inside me. "Where were you?" I asked finally, voice barely above a whisper. "Out," he said, without looking up. "Just grabbing coffee." I wanted to throw something. I wanted to make him feel a fraction of the chaos he had created in me. But I just turned and went to our bedroom, closing the door behind me.
I sat on the bed and cried in the dark, feeling the weight of every choice I had made. The career I abandoned, the trust I gave blindly, the self-respect I had slowly let slip away. In the days that followed, I tried to map it all, trying to understand how someone I loved could build a secret life while sharing a home with me. I started to retrace all the moments I had ignored, the phone hidden in his pocket, the sudden trips to the store, the unexplained late nights, the charm that suddenly had an edge I hadn't recognized. Each memory twisted in my mind like a knife, and every time I tried to confront him, he deflected, brushed it off, made me feel irrational for noticing, as if the problem was me. It wasn't just infidelity. It was the way he had quietly rewritten the rules of our marriage while I was still holding the original contract in my hands. And what hurt the most was that I had given him everything: my career, my independence, my sense of self, thinking it was love, thinking it was partnership. And he used that gift, that trust, to build a life that excluded me. The house felt smaller after that, suffocating, filled with the echo of lavender that wasn't mine, touches that weren't mine, late-night texts that weren't for me. I started sleeping on the couch sometimes, just to be away from him, to remind myself that I still had boundaries I hadn't crossed, even if my life felt like it had already been stolen. And yet, even in my darkest hours, even as the betrayal cut through me sharper than anything I had ever known, part of me wanted to fight for us, wanted to believe there was some explanation, some chance he could redeem himself. But deep down, I knew. I knew that once trust is broken this completely, it doesn't come back. You can patch things, pretend things are normal, but underneath, the fracture runs so deep that every word, every laugh, every touch carries the weight of what was taken. I didn't know what to do next. Leave? Stay? Confront him fully? Pretend it never happened? Each option felt like stepping into fire. Each possibility carried a different kind of pain. And as I sat in the dim light of the apartment that was supposed to be ours, I realized something I couldn't ignore. I had built my life around a man who wasn't the person I thought he was, and every day I stayed, I was complicit in erasing myself. For weeks, I hovered in that gray space between rage and despair. I kept myself busy, pretending that life could move forward while knowing the foundation had crumbled. I started sleeping less, wandering the apartment at odd hours, drinking too much coffee, replaying every conversation, every laugh, every little thing I had ignored or explained away. The city outside our window went about its normal life: rain, traffic, people laughing in bars, but inside it felt like time had stopped. I tried talking to friends, carefully, vague enough to protect myself, yet hoping they'd see what I couldn't. "He's distant," I'd say. "I think something's off." But no one could see it for me. Everyone assumed marriage had its ups and downs, that long-distance work schedules could strain anyone. No one knew about Sophie. No one knew about the late-night texts or the coffee shop meetings. Not even me fully, at first. I couldn't articulate it because the words themselves carried too much weight. Then came the night that broke me in a way nothing else had. Evan said he was going out for a work thing, and I believed him. I'd gotten to the point where every excuse sounded plausible because I had trained myself to accept them. Hours later, around 11:30, I caught a glimpse of his car through the window, parked 2 blocks from a nightclub I had never been to. My stomach dropped. I didn't follow right away. I just watched, frozen, heart pounding. Eventually, I got in the car, telling myself I wasn't going to confront him. I just wanted to see, to confirm, to make it real. He wasn't alone. He was leaning against the building, laughing, arm around a woman who wasn't me. The sight hit me harder than anything before. The casual intimacy, the comfort of 2 people who didn't have to hide, made me feel invisible, irrelevant, erased. I felt anger, of course, sharp and hot, but also a slow, grinding grief. Grief that I had given up everything, my career, my independence, my life, for someone who didn't value me enough to stay true. I went home and didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about every decision I had made. Every time I had laughed off a red flag, every time I had accepted his explanation, every time I had ignored my own instincts. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch something. I wanted to cry until my chest was empty. But mostly, I just felt hollow. The confrontation came the next morning. I waited until he got home, watching him walk through the door, calm, casual, unaware that the walls of our life had shifted so dramatically while he had been out living another one. I didn't greet him. I didn't ask how his night went. I just sat down at the kitchen table, hands clasped, chest tight, mind racing. "I know," I said, voice trembling but firm. "I know about Sophie. I know where you've been. I know about the texts. I know about everything." He froze. For the first time, I saw him falter, but not with guilt, not with shame, with irritation. "You're overreacting," he said, shrugging like it was nothing. "It's complicated. You're imagining things." "Imagining?" I laughed, bitter and hollow. "I watched you. I followed you.
I know. I've known for weeks. Don't tell me I'm imagining. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic I had never noticed before. Look, it's not what you think. It's complicated. I stood up, shaking with rage, grief, disbelief. Complicated? You cheated on me. You lied to me. You built a secret life while I gave up everything for us. Everything. And you call it complicated? He didn't answer. He couldn't. And in that silence, I felt the full weight of betrayal. I felt all the years of compromise, of sacrifice, of surrender collapse into a single moment. I realized with a clarity that made my stomach twist that the man I loved, the man I had trusted completely, didn't exist. Not in the way I thought he did. Not in any way that included me. I left. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just walked out of the apartment, my keys in my hand, the echo of his indifference following me down the hallway. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay, couldn't breathe, couldn't pretend anymore. The next weeks were a blur of hotel rooms, therapy sessions, and legal consultations. I tried to reclaim pieces of myself I hadn't realized I had lost. I updated my resume, reached out to old colleagues, started networking again. Every time I answered a phone call or wrote an email, I felt like I was stepping back into a life I had abandoned, a life that had been waiting quietly for me, patient and persistent, beneath the rubble Evan had built. But even as I took these steps, the grief and anger lingered. Seeing him with her, knowing what I had sacrificed, knowing how easily he discarded me, it didn't leave. It embedded itself in my thoughts, my dreams, my sense of self. I started journaling, not to analyze, not to forgive, but to survive, to put words around the chaos, to prevent myself from losing my mind in a haze of rage and regret.
I remember one night sitting alone in a cheap motel room, staring at the ceiling, and realizing something that terrified me. I had loved him so completely, so blindly, that I had erased myself in the process. I hadn't just paused my career. I had paused my life. My voice, my independence, my confidence, all of it had been absorbed into a man who never deserved it. And for the first time, I felt not just anger, but an aching, hollow emptiness for the person I used to be. I started reaching out to old friends, trying to piece together a version of myself that existed before Evan. Some days were better than others. Some days I felt empowered. Some days I wanted to curl up and disappear. The hardest moments were the quiet ones, when the apartment felt too big, too empty, too full of memories I couldn't touch without feeling the knife of betrayal all over again. Eventually, I realized I couldn't just leave things in limbo. I had to confront the reality, not just for my sanity, but for closure. I hired a private investigator. It felt ridiculous, like something out of a movie I never thought I'd live through. But I needed proof, confirmation, something tangible to counter the disbelief that kept gnawing at me. Every report, every picture, every confirmation of his affair drove the knife deeper, but also strengthened something in me. Something that said I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. The day I finally filed for divorce, I felt both relief and a crushing, hollow sorrow. Relief that I was reclaiming control, that I was no longer entirely at his mercy. Sorrow for the time lost, for the betrayal, for the quiet, suffocating life I had built around someone who didn't deserve it. I cried in the lawyer's office, not just for the end of a marriage, but for myself, for the person I had silenced, ignored, and abandoned along the way. And in that moment, sitting across from a woman who had seen countless cases of betrayal, I realized something. I wasn't broken. I had been deceived. I had been manipulated. I had been betrayed. But I was still here, still standing, still breathing, still capable of reclaiming the life I had paused, the life I deserved. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't easy. Healing rarely is. But each day, each decision to focus on myself, each small victory, sending a resume, going on a date, laughing without guilt, was a step toward reclaiming the person I had lost. And in those moments, I started to feel a glimmer of something I hadn't in years, possibility. Even as the wound remained raw, even as the betrayal lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake, I began to realize that my story wasn't over. That the life I had paused could still resume, shaped by my own choices, my own courage,
my own resilience. And while Evan had written his story without me, I was reclaiming mine. I didn't expect the final confrontation to feel so anticlimactic. By the time I returned to our apartment for the last time, the divorce papers in hand, Evan looked almost casual, like we were still cohabiting roommates rather than two people whose entire marriage had collapsed. The place smelled like him: cologne, coffee, faint traces of whatever perfume she wore. Every inch of the apartment was loaded with memories I had fought so hard to ignore. I walked through the room slowly, like a tour of a life I had once owned, but that now belonged entirely to someone else, or perhaps to no one. I stared at the couch where we had spent our first lazy Sunday morning together. I lingered in the kitchen where we had argued over burnt toast and leftover pasta. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, of whispered promises, of dreams I had built with him. All of it felt like it had been quietly erased by someone who had never really been there the way I thought he was. When he came out of the bedroom, he looked at me with a calm I had almost envied in the past. "You are really leaving," he said, like it was a simple statement of fact. "Yes," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. I had rehearsed this moment in my head countless times, imagining tears, shouting, a fight that would end with a clear winner and loser. But here, standing in the apartment where we had built a life, I realized that the victory wasn't mine in the dramatic sense. It was mine in the survival sense. I was walking away alive, whole, awake. That was enough. He leaned against the counter, casual, almost smug. "I guess this is it, huh?" "Yeah," I said. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I didn't apologize for years of sacrifice that he had treated like it was nothing. I just handed him the copy of the papers I had signed and walked toward the door. Every step was heavy, every breath a mixture of grief, anger, and relief. As I closed the door behind me, the sound echoed through the empty apartment, a hollow reminder of everything lost, but also everything I was reclaiming. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The life I was stepping into was mine alone, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The following months were messy, painful, and liberating all at once. I moved into a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, nothing extravagant, just a space that belonged entirely to me. I refurnished it slowly, bringing pieces of myself back into a life that Evan had tried to define without me. Each painting, each book, each photograph on the wall felt like reclaiming a fragment of identity I had lost. Work became my anchor. I threw myself into my career with a fierceness I hadn't realized I still possessed. Every email I sent, every project I led, every success was a small act of defiance against the years I had spent pausing my life for someone who didn't truly value it. I started networking again, reconnecting with old colleagues, attending events I had skipped while living under Evan's schedule, his needs, his rules. It felt like learning to walk again, but this time on my own terms. Dating was a different kind of minefield. I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't sure I wanted it yet, but I wanted to remember what it felt like to be seen, to be desired, to be wanted for myself. There were awkward dinners, one-night flings, confusing texts, moments that made me laugh and cry in equal measure. Some nights I went home alone and cried anyway, the memory of betrayal still fresh, still raw. But slowly, I began to understand that intimacy, connection, and trust were things I could rebuild, not just with others, but within myself. Therapy helped in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sitting in a quiet room, speaking to someone trained to listen without judgment, I began untangling the threads of guilt and shame Evan had left behind. I realized that his betrayal wasn't my fault, that giving up my career hadn't made me weak, that loving him didn't make me naive. It was just human. I had trusted, I had sacrificed, and I had learned the hardest way that some people aren't capable of the reciprocity we hope for. That wasn't the end of me, it was a beginning. The hardest part wasn't leaving Evan, or even discovering the affair. It was the years of erasure, the slow fading of my own identity while I focused on someone else. It was realizing that love, no matter how deep, cannot exist without respect, cannot survive without honesty, cannot flourish without equality, and accepting that reality, bitter as it was, gave me a power I hadn't felt in years.
There were moments of anger. Late nights alone, remembering Sophie, imagining the ease with which they had shared a life while I was sidelined. I wanted to call, to confront, to make him feel even a fraction of what I felt. But I didn't. Not because I forgave him, not because I understood him, but because I finally understood myself. I didn't need him to validate my pain. I didn't need revenge to feel justice. I needed freedom. And freedom was terrifying. Because for the first time in years, I was fully responsible for myself. My career, my happiness, my sense of self, everything rested squarely on my shoulders. I had to rebuild, reimagine, reassert who I was without Evan. Some days were crushing. Some nights I cried into my pillows, exhausted by the emotional labor of reclaiming a life I had paused for someone who didn't deserve it. But each morning I woke, I took a small step forward. I applied for jobs, I joined social clubs, I reconnected with friends. And little by little, the hollow ache began to dull. I learned to be alone in ways I hadn't before, to find comfort in my own company, to trust my own judgment without seeking approval or validation from someone else. I rediscovered passions I had shelved: photography, writing, even running again. Each act, each choice, each moment of self-care felt like reclaiming territory that had been quietly stolen from me over the years. Eventually, the anger became a fuel, not a chain. I used it to push myself forward, to demand better from life, to refuse to settle for a future defined by someone else's duplicity. Evan faded from my daily consciousness. I stopped following him on social media, stopped asking mutual friends about him, stopped caring about his life at all. His presence became a shadow I acknowledged only to remind myself of how far I had come. One quiet evening, months after the divorce was finalized, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the dark water of the lake. I had a cup of tea in hand, a book I was actually reading, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The apartment was mine. The city was mine. My career, my friendships, my life, every piece of it belonged to me again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something approaching joy. Not reckless, not naive, but deep, grounding, undeniable. I don't think about Evan every day anymore. Sometimes I remember the betrayal, the anger, the grief, but not with the same suffocating intensity. I remember it as a lesson, brutal and vivid, about trust, self-worth, and the dangers of surrendering too much of yourself to someone else. And I use it as a reminder not to lose myself again, to never let someone else define the boundaries of my life. I don't know if I'll ever fully stop questioning, if the echo of his betrayal will ever completely vanish. But I do know this: I am here. I am whole. I am reclaiming every piece of me that I gave up. And in that, there is a quiet, hard-earned triumph that no one, not even Evan, can take away. I gave up my career for him, my independence, my sense of self. And in the process, I learned who he really was. And in learning that, I also learned who I am and who I refuse to be again.